Ethan Carter learned very early that disappointment had a sound. Sometimes it sounded like his father sighing heavily whenever someone asked about Ethan's career. Sometimes it sounded like his mother's embarrassed laugh during family dinners when relatives compared their successful children. But most of the time, disappointment sounded like silence, the cold silence that followed every time Ethan admitted he was still working in his tiny woodworking shop. The Carter family worshipped success. Success meant expensive watches, luxury cars, business degrees, and perfect social media photos. Ethan's older brother, Daniel, was a corporate lawyer who lived in a penthouse apartment downtown. His younger sister, Claire, had married a wealthy real estate investor and spent her days posting vacation pictures from Europe. And then there was Ethan. At 29 years old, he rented a cramped workshop beside an old mechanic garage on the edge of town. The air inside always smelled like cedar wood, varnish, and sawdust. His hands were rough, his clothes were simple, and no matter how hard he worked, his bank account never seemed to grow. To his family, that made him a failure. "You're talented," his mother would often say with fake kindness. But talent doesn't pay bills. His father was less gentle. "You should have joined the family company years ago," he would mutter. "Instead, you play with wood like a teenager with a hobby." Ethan usually stayed quiet during those conversations, not because the words didn't hurt, but because he was tired of defending a dream nobody respected. The truth was, Ethan loved his work. There was something magical about taking lifeless pieces of wood and turning them into something beautiful. Every scratch, every polished edge, every detail carried part of his soul. While other people chased money, Ethan chased perfection. But passion was invisible to people who only cared about status. One rainy Thursday evening, Ethan was sanding the edge of a massive walnut table when his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Don't forget Vanessa's wedding next Saturday. Please wear something decent." A second message followed immediately. "And Ethan, try not to talk too much about your workshop this time." Ethan stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone again. Of course, even before the wedding started, his family was already ashamed of him. Vanessa, his cousin, was marrying into one of the richest families in the state. Her future father-in-law, Richard Beaumont, owned luxury hotels across multiple countries. The wedding was expected to be enormous. Politicians, celebrities, executives, and investors would all attend. People with power, people his family desperately wanted to impress, which meant Ethan would spend the entire night pretending not to exist. The following week passed slowly. Ethan buried himself in work, spending nearly 16 hours a day inside the workshop. He was finishing a private commission for an extremely wealthy client whose identity had remained completely anonymous during the entire project. The client had demanded perfection, and Ethan had delivered it. The final piece was unlike anything he had ever created, a breathtaking handcrafted conference table made from rare black walnut wood, detailed with gold-lined carvings so precise they looked almost unreal. When the delivery company finally collected the table, Ethan stood silently in the empty workshop, feeling both proud and strangely emotional. Months of sleepless nights had disappeared through the back of a truck. No signature, no recognition. Just another project completed in silence. Saturday arrived too quickly. The wedding venue looked like something from a royal movie. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of elegantly dressed guests, while violin music floated through the ballroom. Ethan instantly felt out of place in his simple black suit. The moment his mother saw him, she adjusted his tie with visible frustration. "You could have bought a better jacket," she whispered sharply. Before Ethan could answer, Daniel walked over smirking. "So," his brother said loudly, holding a glass of champagne, "still building little chairs in your tiny shop?" Several nearby relatives laughed quietly. Ethan forced a small smile, something like that. Daniel shook his head arrogantly. "Man, I still can't believe you wasted your life like this." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. But before he could respond, something strange happened. Across the ballroom, an older man suddenly froze mid-conversation. Richard Beaumont, the billionaire father of the groom. And he was staring directly at Ethan with complete disbelief in his eyes. The ballroom continued to sparkle with music, laughter, and clinking glasses, but for Ethan Carter, everything felt strangely distant now, because Richard Beaumont was still staring at him, not casually, not politely, like he had just seen something impossible. Ethan shifted uncomfortably under the weight of that gaze. He quickly glanced around, half expecting the billionaire to be looking at someone behind him. Someone important, someone worthy of that attention. But when Richard Beaumont took a step forward, it became clear. It was him. Daniel noticed it too, and immediately straightened his posture, smoothing his suit as if preparing for an important introduction. Ethan's mother also noticed and quickly whispered, "Stay quiet and don't embarrass us." Richard Beaumont crossed the marble floor with calm, steady steps. The entire room subtly quieted, sensing something significant was about to happen. He stopped directly in front of Ethan. For a moment no one spoke. Ethan felt every eye in the room turning toward him. Then Richard spoke. "I know you," he said firmly. Ethan blinked in confusion. I think you might be mistaken, sir." A few guests chuckled softly, assuming it was a misunderstanding. But Richard shook his head immediately. "No," he said, "there is no mistake." He slowly raised his hand and pointed, not at Ethan's face, but at something deeper, as if recognizing a signature only he could see. "You built it," Richard said. The room went silent. Ethan frowned. "I'm sorry, built what?" Richard's eyes sharpened with intensity. "The Blackwood executive table, the one installed at Beaumont Global headquarters last month." A ripple of shock moved through nearby guests. Ethan's heart skipped. That project was supposed to be anonymous. He hesitated. "Yes, I did that commission." Gasps spread through the crowd. Richard exhaled like a man who had finally found something he had been searching for across continents. "I knew it," he said quietly, almost relieved. The craftsmanship, the precision, no factory, no team, no mass production could ever replicate that level of detail. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "I have spent 6 weeks trying to find the person who created it. 6 weeks asking designers, architects, engineers. No one could tell me who you were." Ethan stood frozen, unsure whether to feel proud or terrified. Behind him he heard his brother whisper, "What the hell is going on?" Richard suddenly turned slightly, addressing the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, "the man standing in front of you is the artist behind one of the finest pieces of craftsmanship I have ever seen in my career." The ballroom erupted into stunned murmurs. Ethan's mother looked like she might faint. Daniel's confident smirk disappeared completely. Richard continued, his tone now respectful and deliberate. "I deal with luxury every day. I see expensive things constantly, but very rarely do I see true artistry. What this man created is not just furniture, it is legacy work." He turned back to Ethan. "And I want to know why someone like you is not leading an international design house already." Ethan swallowed hard. "People don't usually take me seriously." A brief silence followed. Then Richard gave a small, sharp nod, as if that answer offended him. "That is their mistake," he said firmly. He extended his hand, and when Ethan shook it, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, his voice now carrying authority and respect, "I would like to offer you a partnership, a long-term position designing signature interiors for Beaumont luxury hotels worldwide." The words hit like thunder. For a moment Ethan couldn't respond, because across the room his family, the same people who called him a failure, were now staring at him like they had just discovered he was someone completely different. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Carter wasn't invisible anymore. The silence after Richard Beaumont's announcement didn't break immediately. It lingered, heavy, suffocating, almost unreal. Ethan Carter stood in the center of it, still processing the handshake, the offer, and the stunned faces of everyone who had once dismissed him like background noise. And then the whispers began. At first they were small. Is that really him? He designed something for Beaumont. Wait, The billionaire is offering him a partnership. But those whispers quickly turned into something sharper regret. His mother looked pale, her lips slightly parted as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Daniel, once so confident and mocking, now stared at Ethan like he was seeing a stranger wearing his brother's face. For years, Ethan had been the failure, the joke of family gatherings, the one who wasted his life. And now, in a single moment, that version of him had vanished. Vanessa's wedding reception continued, but the atmosphere had completely shifted. Guests who once ignored Ethan were suddenly watching him carefully, trying to understand what they had missed. Richard Beaumont remained composed, but his respect for Ethan was obvious in every word he spoke afterward. He invited Ethan to sit at the main table reserved for VIP guests, the same table where politicians and executives were seated. Ethan hesitated, but only for a second. Then he walked forward, not arrogantly, not proudly, just calmly. And that calmness hurt his family more than any insult ever could, because Ethan didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. As he passed his relatives, Daniel tried to recover his pride with a forced laugh. "So you got lucky," he muttered. "One rich guy notices you and suddenly you're important." Ethan stopped for a moment. For the first time that night, he looked directly at his brother. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet certainty. "It wasn't luck," Ethan said softly. "It was work." Then he continued walking, no arguments, no explanation. No need for validation. That was the moment Daniel realized something he didn't want to accept. Ethan didn't need their approval anymore. At the VIP table, Richard leaned slightly toward him. "You've been underestimated," he said quietly. Ethan gave a faint smile. "I'm used to it." "That ends now," Richard replied. Across the hall, Ethan's mother finally approached him later, her voice trembling. "Ethan," she started, "we didn't know you were doing something like this. If we had," Ethan interrupted gently, "you would have treated me differently." He said. She paused, because she couldn't deny it. That truth hung between them, heavier than any argument. "I didn't stop being your son when I was struggling," Ethan added quietly. "You just stopped seeing me." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't respond. Later that evening, news of Richard Beaumont's announcement began spreading online. Within hours, Ethan's name appeared in design blogs, business forums, and luxury architecture pages. The failure had become a headline, but Ethan didn't rush to celebrate. Instead, he sat alone for a moment near the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. For the first time, people saw his value, and yet inside him, there was no desire for revenge through anger. Only something quieter, something stronger, because the sweetest revenge wasn't humiliation or shouting or proving others wrong. It was simply becoming undeniable, and Ethan Carter had just begun. 1 year changed everything, but not in the way Ethan Carter's family ever imagined. Beaumont Luxury Design Studios had become one of the fastest growing interior architecture firms in the country. What started as a quiet partnership between Ethan and Richard Beaumont turned into a global name associated with handcrafted perfection, minimalist elegance, and unmatched artistic detail. Ethan's designs were now featured in luxury hotels across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Celebrities requested his work. Billionaires waited months for consultations. His name, once ignored, was now spoken with respect in boardrooms that once would have never let him enter. And yet, Ethan himself remained unchanged. He still preferred simple clothes. He still spent long hours in workshops instead of flashy offices. He still smelled faintly of wood polish instead of expensive cologne, but something inside him had transformed forever. Confidence not loud, not arrogant, but steady, the kind that no longer needed permission. On the day of Vanessa's second wedding anniversary celebration, the Carter family received an unexpected invitation. Not from Vanessa, but from Ethan. His mother stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a formal invitation to the opening of the Ethan Carter Foundation for Young Designers, a program offering scholarships, training, and mentorship for underprivileged artists. Daniel frowned as he read it. He's really putting his name everywhere now, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. Because they all knew the truth. Ethan wasn't putting his name everywhere. The world was putting it there for him. At the event hall, the Carter family arrived early, dressed carefully, trying too hard to look proud instead of nervous. They were no longer the center of attention. Instead, they stood quietly among politicians, architects, investors, and media reporters. And then Ethan appeared, but not the Ethan they remembered. He walked in wearing a tailored black suit, calm and composed, with Richard Beaumont by his side, and several international designers greeting him respectfully. Cameras flashed as guests turned toward him instinctively. The same relatives who once mocked him now straightened their posture, hoping to be acknowledged. Ethan stepped onto the stage. For a moment he paused, not to boast, not to show power, but to look at the audience. And somewhere in the crowd he saw his family. His mother's eyes were already wet. His father looked older than before. Daniel avoided eye contact for a second too long. Ethan took a slow breath. When I was younger, he began, I was told I was wasting my life. A quiet murmur moved through the room. I was told passion doesn't matter, that dreams don't pay bills, that success is only what people can see on the surface. He paused. But none of that was true. Silence deepened. I didn't become successful because I proved others wrong. He continued. I became successful because I refused to stop building what I believed in. His gaze shifted briefly toward his family, but there was no anger in it anymore. Only distance, not hatred, closure. I'm not here to punish anyone for not understanding me, Ethan said softly. I'm here to make sure no young artist ever feels as small as I once did. Applause slowly filled the hall. Not forced, not polite, real. As the event continued, Ethan stepped down from the stage and walked past his family without stopping. His mother reached out slightly, as if wanting to say something, but she didn't, and Ethan didn't look back. Because revenge was never about destruction. It was about transformation, and the boy they once called a failure had already built a life they could only quietly admire from a distance.